Welcome to Michael Potts F1, everything Formula One, but from a photographer's point of view. Round 7, the Spanish Grand Prix. This year's Spanish Grand Prix was a little bit of a classic. Spain is usually one of the less exciting races of the year, but this year was something quite remarkable. We had over 100 overtakes during the course of the race, and I think that must be some sort of Spanish Grand Prix record.
I've heard some commentators say it was not the best Barcelona Grand Prix, but remember, this is a track where the pole sitter usually wins. In fact, they win more often than at any other race in the year, even more than Monaco. So it wasn't a surprise that Max got a full house, or a Grand Slam, which is a win, a pole, and the fastest lap. That's only the third time he's done it in his career. It will terrify his rivals on how easily he achieved that, and it will terrify his teammate on how big that gap is getting as we now return to proper racing tracks. Part of the reason that this race was so exciting is that there was no winter testing in Barcelona this year. So that means the teams hadn't had 3 or 4 days of running around the track, endlessly testing their cars and seeing how they perform in all possible situations. We have the new ground effect cars, which make overtaking and following a lot easier. But probably most significantly, there's been a massive change to the final part of the track. Gone is the old chicane, which used to slow the cars down before they came to the final corner. Now, from turn 12, they're almost flat out until the first corner. This is taking 6 seconds off the lap time.
This has allowed cars to get a lot closer to each other and has increased the opportunity for overtaking. It's a brilliant change, and it's something that people have been calling for many years. Photographically speaking, it's a little bit of a loss because the chicane was a great place to photograph the cars bouncing over the curbs.
But it wasn't just this change. The race promoter has been very busy in the off-season. There are new grandstands, there's improvements all around the track, and the whole event is looking really good. Most of the buildings have had a fresh coat of paint, and it's a massive step forward from last year. The attendance for the race weekend was 284,066 people. That's a big step up from last year, but it's still not the record. That was set in 2007 when Alonso was fighting for the title. But large crowds is a trend we are seeing this year, so if you do want to attend a race, it's best to buy your ticket as soon as possible.
For both the practice sessions on Friday, Nikon were exceptionally kind and let me use this Nikon 400 2.8 Z lens.
This has been designed perfectly for Z cameras, and it has a built-in 1.4 converter. So with a flip of a switch, it becomes a 560mm lens. It does retail for about 15,000 euros, so it's probably not one I'll be adding to my kit bag anytime soon. But still, it's a stunning lens, and if you get a chance to use one, do so. It's very cool.
For free practice 1, I was in the pits, and this week everyone's eyes were all on Ferrari, who had brought some major upgrades to the race.
They've introduced a cutaway at the bottom of the side pod, but it's still scallop-shaped at the top. This does bring it more in line with the other teams, but it still didn't stop Ferrari's struggles this weekend. It was a bit of an odd one. Charles really struggled. He was 19th in qualifying, considering last year he was on pole position. But then, on the other side of the garage, Carlos was second. He was challenging Max on the run down to turn 1, but then during the course of the race, he lost a significant amount of pace and ended up 5th behind both the Red Bulls and the Mercedes. Here's a shot from the pits of Fernando Alonso using that Nikon 400. You can see how crisp and sharp it is. It's just a gorgeous lens that creates such a beautiful image. It is quite dark in the garages, but this lens performs magnificently.
For free practice 2, I photographed from the final corner. I wanted to see how the cars were behaving with all these new changes that had taken place there. I had left this to the second session because, to be honest, I was a little bit nervous to see how the cars would behave coming into this corner. I thought a few of them might lose control, so I decided to leave this to other photographers to experiment with.
The loss of the chicane is actually a bit of a sad thing, photographically speaking, because it was an opportunity for us to get a photograph of the cars bouncing over the curbs. Quite often, a situation that's great for photography is not that good for racing. So standing at the final corner, it looked to me like the cars were travelling significantly faster than they did in previous years. They were taking so much more speed into the corner. But this generation of Formula 1 cars really look like they're nailed onto the track. They look like they're almost on rails. This shot of Nico Hülkenberg going around the corner illustrates that. A view from behind the corner shows you how hard the drivers are pushing, as sparks are flying from the rear of the car as they go over the rumble strips, completing the lap. I walked all the way around to turn 12, and really the sense that I got in this whole area was how much faster the cars were than previously in this section. The pole lap was about 6.5 seconds faster than last year, and that's largely because of this change. This equates to roughly an 8.5% quicker lap time than previous years, so this is a very significant change. At turn 12, you get this great shot of the cars passing by. There's some old school tie barriers in the foreground. I'm not entirely sure why they haven't replaced these with something more modern, but it does look good on the photos. This is a shot of Carlos Sainz at 1/10 of a second.
For the third practice session, I photographed this from outside of turn 9. But I only got a few laps in the dry before the rain came down. Unfortunately, I didn't have any wet weather gear with me, so I spent most of that session huddled under a marshal's tent trying to keep my cameras dry.
It was a bit weird. There was enough rain to stop the drivers riding on slicks, but not really enough to encourage them to go out on intermediates or full wets. And when they did, there wasn't enough standing water on the track to create beautiful rooster tails or make it a spectacular scene. For a large part of the session, all the drivers stayed in the garage. Lando Norris was the first one to brave the tricky conditions, and he's often the first driver to go out when the conditions are a bit difficult. There's a good view of the cars coming up turns 7 and 8, where you can see them driving up the hill towards you. I carried on round to turn 6 because here one of the sponsors had done something quite unusual. Rolex had painted both sides of the barriers. Usually they just paint the side that's seen on TV, but this was pretty cool because it gave you a green line in front of and behind the car. Here's a shot of Carlos taken with the grey skies in the background. There's a marshal to the left, and you can see how nicely the colour has framed him in this image. I took another shot here using an ND filter and a slow shutter speed. This is 1/5 of a second. And here I'm trying to use the green advertising boards as well as the marshal in a slightly different way.
The rain absolutely bucketed down before qualifying, and the track was still a little bit damp when the cars came out.
And a few drivers spun off in front of me. I was standing in the inside of the stadium section. There appeared to be a slippery spot on the way up to turn 12, which caught quite a few drivers off guard. Here's Yuki Tsunoda going off into the gravel, and here's a shot of a beached Bottas. I'd come here to photograph Max in front of the stands full of Orange Army supporters. Last year, his fans were incredibly loud and raucous. Here's a shot of Carlos in front of the stand dedicated to him. I do think it was also invaded by a large number of Fernando Alonso fans. On the inside of the final corner, you can get a shot of the cars taking through a small grove of trees. This shot is taken at 1/6 of a second, and the trees create an interesting effect as Max hurtles past. Here, you can also get pretty close to the pit entry, and it's a great spot to catch the drivers just after they've finished their flying laps. Our gathering position for the podium celebration did allow me to capture the shot of Max as he headed out to this garage for his final qualifying lap. He was 1/2 second faster than his nearest rival, Carlos Sainz, with Perez making another error in qualifying. He was pushing the car too hard in one of the earlier sessions. It was great to see Lando Norris taking the 3rd fastest time, and there's now a very interesting battle brewing behind Max, where a lot of cars and drivers are very, very close together. Last week we had an Aston Martin and an Alpine. This week we've got a McLaren and a Ferrari, and Mercedes is right up there with them. So who comes out on top is a lot down to each individual's car characteristics, the weather conditions at the time, and how each driver exploits those situations. In qualifying in Barcelona, the cooler weather probably helped the McLaren, but it was probably a little bit harder for them on race day when it was hotter. Apart from car number 1, which is so much further ahead than everyone else, it's getting really exciting in Formula 1. There were rumours that Lewis might be off to Ferrari in a $40 million deal, even though both parties have denied this, and it's probably just a story to spice up his contract negotiations with Mercedes. I was trying to capture images of Lewis and Ferrari in the same shot. On Friday, he wore all Versace, including this Medusa nylon shirt and matching pants. On Saturday, he was wearing a striped silk shirt with matching striped trousers, and on race day, he was wearing Valentino with Mercer sunglasses.
The paddock was once again absolutely awash with celebrities, but at this race it was mainly footballers. I chose rather an exhilarating spot to photograph the start of the race. This is on the inside of the start-finish straight. The cars are passing by at great speed, and while there's not a hell of a lot of protection between the cars now, it does give you a good opportunity to photograph them uninterrupted.
It wasn't a great race for the two local lads, after they appeared to have so much promise in the build-up. Carlos ended up 5th, and Fernando was down in 7th, behind his teammate, who I was actually a little bit critical in last week's video, but he's really stepped up this week. Lance was even running in the podium places at one stage. Yuki Tsunoda had a cracking race and was really unlucky to be penalised for a vigorous defence on Zhou. The Japanese driver has improved massively this year and has been really unlucky to miss out on several point-scoring occasions. He's definitely deserved a better haul of points than he's actually achieved. But it was the two Mercedes drivers that looked particularly quick this weekend. They had new upgrades in Monaco, and those appeared to be working as expected. Both drivers looked to have great race pace, and George did an amazing job starting in 12th place behind Sergio Perez and then grabbing the final podium position ahead of the Mexican. That was a top drive. He did luck out a little bit at the start, and maybe he got a bit of an advantage by going off the track. It was another difficult weekend for Perez. This was always going to be a max track, but Perez would have expected to finish 2nd rather than 4th. And after not scoring points in Monaco, their gap to Max is over 50 points. So, barring some unfortunate mechanical issues, it's going to be very hard for anyone to challenge Verstappen this year. He scored his first Grand Slam of the year in Barcelona. He was half a second ahead of his nearest rival in qualifying and finished nearly half a lap ahead of 2nd place. And you always felt that he had something in reserve, that he wasn't being pushed anywhere near his limit. Formula One is now the Max Verstappen show, and there is no sign that he will let up his dominance. He's a phenomenally consistent driver. In the past 50 races, he's been on the podium 40 times. He's taking title number 3 at a canter. Hang on. I just want you to have a close look at something here. Have a close look at both Adrian Newey and Max Verstappen's Red Bull cans. They are both unopened.
Thank you so much for joining me at this look back on the Spanish Grand Prix. I really hope you've enjoyed it. What did you think of the race? Please do let me know in the comments below. And if you haven't yet, please do like and subscribe. It really helps me grow this channel. There were rumours going around the paddock suggesting this might be the last Barcelona Grand Prix. And based on this weekend's showing, I really hope that isn't the case. The promoter and the organisers have done an outstanding job and produced an absolutely classic venue. So here's hoping for many more Barcelona races. Next race, we're off to Montreal. So until then, goodbye.